I think that Nolan is obsessed with Gerard. I don't know if he knows he is.
Yeah, for sure. No, for
But it's
sure.
obvious in the Batman films and everything else. Like he's got this idea of, the scapegoat. And so for him, Odysseus has to become the scapegoat. And this is because he has a modern liberal Christian view of Xenia,
hmm
in which the obligation is always on the side of the host and never on the side of the guest. But the actual guest host relationship, you can't violate it either way.
Yeah.
So, as a host, you have to show hospitality, but then as a guest, you have to be a good guest. And if you do something like overstepping your bounds, overstaying your welcome, taking more than your host has offered. So, Paris violates Menelaus's Xenia when he abducts Helen. The whole Odyssey is actually structured, not just the end, but the whole of the Odyssey is actually structured by around the question who honors Xenia and who does not.
Yeah.
And of course, these rules are for humans, so they don't quite apply to people like Calypso and Circe.
I do agree with you, and I hate to do it, but I do agree with you that this is a tendency in the film, and this is because of the way that he ends it. This is Jonathan Pageau. Welcome to the Symbolic World. All right, hello everyone. I'm here with Deacon Seraphim for an emergency Universal History episode. Deacon Seraphim has seen the Odyssey. Of course, I've seen the Odyssey. He has not watched. He watched my first video, but he hasn't watched my big breakdown. And he told me that he had some words.
That's
And so
right.
I'm ready to go.
Are
I'm
you
ready
guys
to go.
ready
Deacon
to
Seraphim.
see Jonathan destroyed with facts and logic on his own channel? Oh, it's going to be brutal. It's going to be brutal.
All right, so people know basically my take. So first of all, we need to hear your take,
Okay.
and then we can see if it holds up to my scrutiny.
Okay. So I went in to see the film. I was initially on the fence about even seeing it. Because of the woke stuff and because of the stuff that some of the actors and actresses were saying in interviews about the film afterwards. And typically speaking, when somebody makes an adaptation of something, and then they immediately after it's over, they come out and say, well, here's all the reasons that the guy who wrote that work was bad and evil and problematic, blah, 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 blah. Um, then it just makes me feel like maybe you don't actually love the thing that you're adapting enough to have the job of doing it. So, but I used to really trust your taste in things, Jonathan. And so when 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 you came out and you gave it kind of like a positive review, I was like, okay, all right, this is interesting. I'll go see
I
the
just want to say
movie.
one thing. I don't want to interrupt you this whole
Yeah.
time, but it's important to understand that actors are not intelligent. This is look, they're just not. Actors are and it's actually one of the reasons why Hollywood's falling apart is because they're letting these actors speak. They used to not speak, they used to show their pretty face, they'd give them the script, you just do the thing. But I think there's almost something, not for all actors, but for a lot of actors, it seems like being not intelligent and kind of a little irrelevant as a human person is almost necessary to be an actor, because you just you spend your life pretending to be other people. And we've like created this weird world where we admire them, but we don't admire them. We admire them because they can pretend to be people we admire. So we
Yeah.
have to remember that.
That is a fair and interesting point. Okay, so I went and saw the movie with my wife, and I have thoughts and feelings. So first of all, there are actually a lot of things in the movie I really liked. Overall, it was much better than I thought it was going to be. When you're making an adaptation of a film, there are 3 levels that you can judge the success of the adaptation by. So this is what we're trying to do, is sort of say, was it good? Was it bad? And that is a tricky thing to do with this film because it is, as you noted, actually quite a tricky film. Um, but in fact, some of the ways it's best are the ways that it's worse, and vice versa. But 3 ways to judge the success of an adaptation. The first way you could judge it would be on its own merits as a work of art. So just say, pretend you've never heard of the source material. Is the cinematography good? Is the dialogue good? Is the writing good? Is the pacing good? Right? These questions. Second thing you can do is ask the question, how does it adapt the accidents or the facts of the source material. So the Odyssey is a story. The story has episodes, has events, has things that happen in it, has accidents, and we need to, and these are portrayed a certain way, originally probably in an oral framework, and then later on written down, and then passed on through a long chain of communication to us today, which includes all kinds of weird historical things that made it possible for us to have these works in translation in English today, right? So you've got this long chain of, this is how we depict the scene with the Cyclops, right? This is what happens in the scene with the Cyclops. Everybody knows the story. But long before I'd read the Odyssey, my dad had told me the story of Odysseus and the
Right.
Cyclops and the nobody pun, which my dad could explain because he knew Greek. Like these kinds of things, like that story has been a big part of my life since I was very young. So what you want to do is adapt the accidents or the facts of your source material in a way that is faithful but also fresh, right? That's seems interesting, or it's just, let's not even say fresh, let's say compelling.
Yeah.
All right, and then the third way that you can judge the success of an adaptation is by looking at its um let's say how well it adapts the ethos or the symbolism or the kind of the spiritual underlay of the original source. So, on thing number one, how good a movie is it just on its own artistic merits? I'll give it like 3 to 3.5 stars out of 5. Obviously, the cinematography was gorgeous. Just in terms of like how shots were framed, Nolan is good at this sort of thing. Nobody's surprised there. Uh, I would just like a word with the costuming department. Um,
But this is not the first, this is the second. Isn't it, you're dealing with now the adaptation part, right? No, you don't
no,
like
no,
the
no,
costume just
no,
in
no, no, no.
general.
I'm not. Let me explain why I'm not. That's a
Yeah,
good
okay.
point. Let me explain why I'm not. Because so in the Middle Ages, when people depict the Odyssey or the Iliad or something like this, they just show those guys in contemporary
Yeah,
armor. They look like knights jousting. So
yeah.
that's fine. I am not saying I wanted now, I'm not saying I don't want, but I'm not saying I wanted or expected everyone to be in accurate Bronze Age Mycenaean Anatolian armor,
Which
right?
would have been amazing
Which
and cool.
would have rocked.
I mean, why does no one make us this? I agree. I
Yeah,
totally agree.
yeah, because it looks so cool, and it would actually look kind of like this crazy foreign fantasy stuff, because stuff was really, like, super
Yeah.
extra. I mean, full plates of bronze mail and feathers and all kinds of things. Like, it would have been
Yeah, it would have
really
been
colorful,
metal.
and yeah, it would have been rad, but I wasn't expecting that, and I'm not asking for it. But the effect of the way that the costuming and everything was handled was so much a hodgepodge that
Mhm.
I never felt like I knew where I was. So your job when you're doing costuming and anything that's got kind of a fantasy or historical element is you have to at least make it feel like a real place. So Tom Holland's character is exclusively wearing outfits from like the Guy Ritchie Arthur movie. And then Odysseus and his men are wearing really bad, like, the let's say, like, Greek soldier or Roman soldier
Yeah,
costuming from a sword and sandal film in the '80s, and it's just all over the place.
yeah.
So that really fell flat for me, and it really kind of broke my immersion in the film. I could really beat this horse to death. Why do we have Viking ships in the Aegean, et cetera, but it's okay, it's okay. Uh, just in general, I felt like this was a huge miss. It's a miss most of all because it was totally unnecessary, like, since The Lord of the Rings, um, which may have been a high watermark for us as a civilization in retrospect, but in any case, since The Lord of the Rings, we've had people, in these film studios who could put all this tons of detail into this kind of, this armor for this culture
Yeah,
and this.
create a world that was coherent and made
Right,
sense.
so if you watch The Lord of the Rings, the world is totally visually coherent. Elf stuff looks like elf stuff, and there's plenty of Tolkien purists out there, and on some days, depending on how many beers I've had, I'm one of them, who will quibble with the way certain things are depicted in the films, but nobody could argue that it's not cohesive.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's thing one. Thing two, artistically, that really broke this thing for me was the dialogue. This is
Yeah, some of the dialogue is just
some of the worst dialogue I've seen in a movie in a long time.
the last worst phrase, worst sentence in a movie where he ends the movie about some reflection on the fact that we no longer have writing and that
Yes.
it's the end of the age.
Were they
It's like,
were they like, "Oh, somebody will appreciate this Linear B reference in the" what?
yeah.
So, my favorite was the sea people, the people from the sea. Yes, the people who are coming from the sea people. Are you talking about the sea people? And it's just like at one point, I felt like I was watching an Abbott and Costello bit. It was
Oh my
just
goodness.
so painful. It was
Yeah,
so
there was
painful. So the dialogue was all a huge miss for me, and it's not even, again, the modernization of the way people were talking. I was basically okay with that. I would prefer, we were a proper civilization where all your sword and sandal epics, everybody knows that people in the ancient world had British accents, or at least the sort of like mid-Atlantic accent, you know?
mhm,
So I would prefer, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and all that stuff.
yeah.
Obviously, everybody would like that, but I was basically fine with the modern language adaptation, or would have been if the dialogue itself had not been so poorly written.
Yeah. There's some dialogue that was good. It's just that it's just that at some point, like it was like a false note, right? All of a sudden you had this really false note
Yeah,
and it just pulled you out of the story where you're like, what? What did you just say? That's
yeah.
ridiculous. Hello, everyone. We are going to have a Symbolic World Summit in Oxford, September 24th to the 26th. When, the Pusey House asked us to come and host an event there, we couldn't say no, but we're so excited about the people we're able to bring there. So Deacon Seraphim, tell us what's going on.
Right. So the theme for this summit is Paradise Imagined, and we are going to be looking at different depictions of paradise, of the Garden of Eden, of heaven, of the earthly paradise, throughout ancient and medieval literature. We have an incredible lineup. Dr. Martin Shaw will be there telling us stories. We'll have Aidan Hart, Father Jacob Siemens, Father Andrew Stephen Damick, yourself, myself. It's going to be just an incredible event. And it won't all just be talks. We're going to spend some time in Pusey House, hearing stories and doing lectures and so on. But then we're going to also spend a lot of time around Oxford. So if you've ever wanted to go and do the Oxford things, you know, um, go to C.S. Lewis's house and drink in the pubs and get a tour of the town and things like this. Like if you've ever wanted to do the Oxford thing, think about you could do it with Martin Shaw. Obviously, of course, me and Jonathan, but like, I mean, come on, bumming around Oxford with Dr. Martin Shaw. Can you imagine anything better than that?
Yeah, and it's only 150 tickets, so it's going to be very intimate. That's why we don't have like a VIP. Everybody will all be together, and a lot of people are going to be there. Paul Kingsnorth is coming. Heather Pollington will be there. Also, even Mary Harrington is going to come, and there's a lot of other people that are going to come that are not the official speakers, but we're all going to be. It's going
Yeah.
to be an amazing time with all these people together.
Yeah, so we know it's a weird time in the world right now to travel and everything else, but if you can possibly make it, I think this will be an incredible event. And again, it's a small event. There's actually a lot of risk putting on an event this small, but I'm just really excited about it. So I hope you'll join us. So that's the first thing. Let's talk about the second thing, which is the adaptation of the accidents of the film. Overall, I thought it was mostly pretty good. Um, I would say, 4 stars probably. So when it comes to the adaptation of the actual events of the story, one of the funny complaints somebody had, I think it was Matt Walsh, was that the movie was, oh, this is just Christopher Nolan trying to do his nonlinear shtick again, and he
I
doesn't
know,
get the
whatever.
grandeur of the epic. And I'm like, bro, have you read the Odyssey? Have you read the Odyssey? Right. So, for those of you who don't know, the Odyssey starts as all epics begin, as Aristotle says they must begin in the middle of things.
Yeah,
And then you depict earlier stuff by means of flashback sequences, usually through a storyteller.
the storytelling. Yeah,
And so the great storyteller in the Odyssey is, of course, Odysseus. And it's interesting because although sometimes when Odysseus goes somewhere to the Phaeacians, for example, which we'll talk about in a moment, there are other people there who are singing songs and telling the songs of Troy. it's always, people are always asking Odysseus for his stories. And sometimes Odysseus tells you a true story.
Yeah, no, that's the thing.
And sometimes
Sometimes he
Odysseus
lies.
tells you a false story. One of the most important false stories Odysseus tells, and this is where the sea people angle could have been so interesting if they had not beaten you about the head and neck with a 2x4 with it, is so for people who don't know, um, there was an event called the Bronze Age collapse.
Happened on
Listen,
a
I just
Tuesday.
got to
Happened on
explain.
a Tuesday.
Yeah, happened on a Tuesday. Yeah. So there's an event called the Bronze Age collapse, one of the most important events in history. And what happens in the Bronze Age collapse? It's written about differently in different places, and there's all kinds. There's a bunch of interesting books you can read about why this happened. The Greeks actually believe that the Bronze Age collapse happened not because of the sea peoples, but because the sons of Hercules returned from Europe.
Mhm.
And this is a whole. Maybe we'll definitely do a universal history video about this sometime soon. They believed that it was the basically the avenging sons of Hercules returning, and this is their way of basically these very warlike tribes from the Balkans who were associated with Hercules, who kind of came in and wrecked, probably wrecked a lot of things
Yeah.
in the Mycenaean world, and then for the Egyptians who sort of survive the Bronze Age collapse, they're really the only Bronze Age civilization that kind of makes it through with
Mhm.
continuity.
Yeah.
The Bronze Age collapse is brought about by the coming of of what the Egyptian chronicles refer to as the people from the sea, the
Yeah.
sea people, the people from the sea. Do you see people? I see
Okay,
people.
so I
Where
want
are those
I
people
wanna
coming
push
from?
back on the
Okay,
CP.
so
The reason, ultimate reason why he does that, which I understand it's a little annoying in the dialogue, is because he wants you to remember this thing, and he wants you to know because he's doing it as a narrative. There's a narrative trope, which is that he's gonna surprise you by telling you that the Odysseus's army are the people of the sea, or at least some aspect of the people of the sea. So that's why he emphasizes it so much, because he wants you to kind of at first fear the people of the sea, so that when he reveals that actually we're the ones destroying civilization, you kind of
yeah,
understand that
so I'm
been haunting you.
I'm actually more in favor of that than you are, which I will explain in
Okay.
a moment.
All right. All right.
I just think he did it badly.
He did it badly in the writing, let's say.
Yes, in the writing. Okay, so one of the stories that Odysseus tells, this is called the Cretan lie, which, as we all know, all
Cretans
Cretans are liars.
are
Just
liars, of
ask
course.
any Cretan. If a Cretan tells you he's lying, is he telling you the truth or is he lying? This is an ancient paradox. It's also referred to by Saint Paul.
Yeah, I know.
So all Cretans are liars, right? So that's a thing you need to remember when Odysseus passes himself off. So in Book 14 of the Odyssey, Odysseus returns to Ithaca in disguise, and there's his old swineherd Eumaeus, who I was my favorite character in the movie, by
Yeah.
the way, super well done. And he,
Leguizamo, who would have thought he could actually play an actual role?
it was so great. Yeah, it was fantastic. I loved him in this. So when he meets Eumaeus, he wants to test his loyalty, and so to test his loyalty, he spins this very intricate fabricated backstory, and this intricate fabricated backstory is called the Cretan lie. And of course, sort of the question here is, well, if all Cretans are liars, and if Odysseus is also usually lying, does that make a truth? Like, you is it sort of like a
Is
double
it turn?
negative? Does
Is
it
it
make a
a double
positive?
inversion? Yeah, a
So
double
the
inversion.
Cretan lie is that he claims to be a wealthy but disgraced Cretan adventurer who couldn't bring himself to settle down after the Trojan War. And instead, he claims that some spirit urged him, in other words, like a god possessed him, a spirit urged him to instead fit out a fleet of 9 ships, and instead of coming home the right way, to instead set sail and raid Egypt. And he describes his crew going berserk as soon as they reach the Nile Delta, ignoring his orders. They immediately began to plunder Egyptian farms, killing the men, dragging off the women and children. The outcries reach the nearby city. The Egyptian king's forces ride out at dawn. They crush the raiding fleet. They kill and enslave most of the crew. And only Odysseus survives by dropping his weapons, kissing the Egyptians' knees, and begging for mercy. So this is how Odysseus gets away. Well, the thing is that this is probably what the actual sea people did. So
Mm.
the actual sea people were it seems like everybody agrees at this point the sea people were actually Mycenaeans, so Odysseus' civilization, and that they raided up and down the coast of the Levant and Egypt, and the Egyptians were actually able to rebuff them. Now, some people, by the way, think that the sea people eventually they become the Philistines.
Yeah, I've heard
There's
that.
even a reference to this in the Bible. But in any case, the story that Odysseus tells about himself, which might be a lie about himself, is a truth about what a lot of the Mycenaeans did on their way home from Troy.
Yeah.
Not everybody got home to Troy, in a quickly.
Yeah.
One of my beefs, by the way, is that Menelaus and Helen are two of the people who actually get away happy from the whole thing, which I really hated the way both of them were portrayed in the film. Um, because of the worst casting in the universe, which was not Helen, it was Menelaus.
Oh, come on.
It was so bad.
I mean,
Oh,
I'm not saying in terms of Menelaus from the poem, but I think in terms of the way that the story is portrayed, I thought that because he was, I really think that Nolan sets you up where you basically have two sets of brothers and sisters. You have Agamemnon and his wife Clytemnestra. You have Menelaus and his wife, and they're completely dysfunctional. Like their relationship is horrible, and he's contrasting that to Penelope, and Odysseus. That to me, like in terms of a narrative structure, that's what he seems to be doing. Because there are only 3 husbands and wives in the movie.
I think you're probably right about that. I just sort of like the happy ending that Homer gives Menelaus and Helen, just like after everything. I don't
Well,
know.
it's also because in this movie he makes everything's an excuse, right? So Helen's actually not the reason for the war. She was just an excuse to go
Yeah.
and destroy Troy. And so for that reason, I thought that, his kind of nonchalant cynicism and his arrogance made, I don't know, it made sense. I liked it
Ugh.
we
Ugh.
definitely gonna disagree
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like when they're out doing the hunting scene and they've got like Marvel Cinematic Universe
I
like
know.
vests on. I was just, what are we doing, guys? But okay. Anyway, so the sea people thing, there's different ideas about what causes the Bronze Age collapse, but basically the idea seems to be that something, maybe a series of supernatural events or a series of volcanic eruptions or a series of the tin trade being disrupted, which destroys our civilization of bronze is collapsing. Come on,
I know.
Nolan.
I
Come
know.
on,
I was
Nolan.
like, don't bring it up. We already said that the writing's on the nose is very difficult.
Listen, so but what does seem to happen is that the Mycenaeans certainly become the sea people, and I
Mm.
do think that if you believe that the Trojan War was a real thing that happened, which I obviously do, then the idea that the Mycenaeans sort of become the sea people on their way home from Troy, and so they are bringing about all this destruction. It is actually hinted at there in the poem itself. And so I like the fact that Nolan picked up on that. I'm just annoyed that he did it badly. Okay. So in general, though, the other adaptations, I thought the Cyclops scene was mostly great. I'm really sorry that we didn't get the pun. One
I
of the
know.
well, I understand his arguments for not doing it. I just think that's lazy, and he could have done it if he'd wanted to. The thing that is different between Odysseus in the poem and Odysseus in the film is that Odysseus in the poem is very clever,
He's
and
cheeky, yeah.
you never yeah, cheeky is a good way to put it, and you never really see that cleverness come across. His men refer to him constantly as being lucky, but obviously that's all just ironic. He's none of
Yeah.
these times they
Well,
stop are
he
lucky.
plays it straight, but it's there in the movie. It's just that Matt Damon, you don't feel that cheekiness. Like he plays it straight. He's cheeky with the whole Sinon story where he like lies and lies to everyone. He's cheeky when he uses reverse psychology to tell his crew to go towards the whirlpool.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a
So there's
yeah.
a few examples where he has that kind of, you can feel Odysseus behind, but you wish that you could see a little sparkle in his eye,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
that he's kind of lying, but he's not. But because he plays it so straight and he has this somber attitude, then you don't catch it as much.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. Obviously, the fact that they did the Cyclops with practical effects was incredible. I felt very sort of like Harryhausen, to me, like the old Harryhausen, Jason and the Argonauts and so on.
That was one of my favorites. In terms of the visuals, I mean,
Yeah,
I was hypnotized by the Cyclops. Like, the way they did his face was
yeah.
so I didn't think anybody do it that way. I thought it was so brilliant and just made it look terrifying.
The way that they adapted Cersei and Calypso respectively was probably as much as they could have gotten away with. One of the things that it's funny, there's all kinds of memes circulating about this right now, but one of the things that is, um, the most, let's say, from a modern Christian or post-Christian point of view, the thing that's the most controversial thing about the poem is how much Odysseus says he wants to get home to his wife,
Yeah, but
but he
just sleeps
seems to
around.
spend at least 8 years of his trip hanging out with hot, immortal babes on islands in the sea.
Yeah.
Cersei for a year, where he, by the way, begets, Penelope's future husband, and then, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't
People
know that.
Oh, there's a sequel to the Odyssey. It's one of the last poems in the epic cycle. And basically what happens is that, his son with Cersei comes to Ithaca, and, Odysseus doesn't recognize him, and so they challenge each other like, in an old story, and then his son kills him. And as Odysseus is lying mortally wounded, and his son Telemachus is, getting all the warriors together to like go get revenge for Odysseus. Odysseus recognizes, wait a minute, this is my son, and so he brings everyone together. And as he's dying, sort of basically says, "Hey, it's okay. I'm just happy to see my son turn out to be such a badass dude." And so it's all good now. And so he forgives them, and he dies. And then Cersei's son marries Penelope, and
What?
Penelope's son marries Cersei, and that's the actual end of the story of what happens to Ithaca. So, anyway, I understand that, by the
Bronze
way,
Age collapse. That's what leads to a Bronze Age
there are
collapse.
a few violations of the church's canon law when it comes to, marriage happening in that story. Um, so so I understand why they just, like, it there is no way to make Odysseus sympathetic to us.
Yeah. But this is where I think that he really made it into a Christian movie. And again, my argument is that he wanted to show uh, the Agamemnon and Menelaus and their relationship with their wives as being completely insane, right?
Yeah,
Leading to murder, leading to and to war and everything. And basically, he wanted to show Penelope and Odysseus as the proper relationship, and for that reason, for us, he had to downplay, and he makes even his relationship with Calypso. He makes it kind of like not his fault, where he was on drugs. Like, she basically, he doesn't even know what he's doing, so he tried to take the blame away from all of the adultery, basically, that he's involved
yeah.
in.
Yeah, I feel like he basically probably did as good a job as he could have done with that. I think people who are saying, "No, I would have actually liked to have seen him sleeping with these other ladies for 8 years before he gets home to Penelope and then cry about how much he missed her." I
Yeah,
what's your damage, man?
I know. It's like it would have been impossible to believe.
Yeah,
These are people that don't know how to tell stories. This is one of the issues too. It's like a lot of people who complain, they don't really have can't imagine doing it where you would have to find solutions to these
yeah,
problems, and you have to deliver something that people actually want to see.
yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult question, like, how would I even retell that part of the Odyssey? I mean, obviously, my older kids have read the Odyssey, but if I were gonna sit down right now with my kids and tell the Odyssey, how would I even retell the part on Calypso's island, um, in a way
Yeah,
that
I skipped that with my kids. I literally skipped Calypso.
yeah,
I told the Cersei story,
yeah,
very similar in the way they did it, about the pigs and everything, but the Calypso part, I remember what I told the Odyssey to my kids when they were like 10, 11, and,
yeah.
obviously, I just skipped that part.
Now, obviously, in the Bronze Age, it is a given that a woman will be faithful to one man, and that a man will have at least 3 women.
Yeah.
Like, let's say an aristocrat, like that's a given. So by Odysseus's sort of by the lights of his own age and everything, like he's not necessarily the problem, except that these other women, Circe and Calypso, both, they're not just women, they're also basically demigoddesses.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the real sort of test he's being put through is not choose between one woman and another woman, but he's actually he's having to choose between a life of immortality. This is what Calypso wants to do. She wants to make him immortal, and then they'll just live forever on their island paradise, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. And so when Odysseus is weeping the whole time that he's there, he's choosing, he's saying, no, I would rather grow old with my old
Mm.
wife
Yeah.
than be here forever with you. And that actually is great.
Yeah, it's
So
like their version of faithfulness.
yeah. So but I mean, obviously, Odysseus has concubines when he's on, he's during the Trojan War and so on. They were not Christians. They were not
Yeah.
Christians.
I want to ask you about Circe, what you think about this, because one of the things people said is that there's a feminist take in Circe, because she really does it like these men that are abusive, these rapists, basically, they're pigs. All they are is their desire. She turns them into pigs and everything. But my vision is that the fact that she had turned her own sister into a crow is a way more subtle thing. So yes, she acts as the kind of modern Me Too type victim, but then she uses that victim status in terms of the movies, in the actual way the movie is done, to also turn her own sister into a crow, and therefore she has isolated herself completely, and she's basically destroying people out of the justification of her own status as a victim in this situation. I don't know if you thought about that.
so do you know who Circe's sister is?
No, I don't know.
It's Pasiphae. Pasiphae is the queen of Crete, and she's most famous as being the mother of the Minotaur.
Oh yeah,
She's the one that climbs into the
she's the one
big
that did that thing.
that we can't talk about because your YouTube channel will definitely get demonetized. So this is what I was really wondering. I was like, as soon as he's like, who's this crow to you? And she's like, it's my sister. Like, because like Circe turning Pasiphae into a crow did not happen
No.
in Greek mythology. So was like, wait a minute. Why? So this is
Well, my sense really is that the reason why was the one I'm saying, which is it. That Nolan wanted to show that her act towards the men was something about her that had become excessive, and ultimately, although she talks about how she hates men and that the men are
yeah
horrible and rapist, she's also damaging her sister. And like when you hear it in the movie, her sister could be all women, like basically the
yeah
way people
yeah
talk about it. That's the way that I understood it. But I didn't know about the fact that Cersei's sister
yeah.
was.
So it's interesting. So Nolan is always working in the shadow of Christian interpretations of the Odyssey and the Iliad, in particular um, the Aeneid,
Yeah, for sure.
which by the way, guys, I just called the Aeneid a Christian interpretation of the Iliad. Get mad in the comments, and then um, I'll explain that later. Not in this video, but certainly in the Universal History Masterclass, we're going to talk a lot about that. But it's particularly the Aeneid and the Divine Comedy. So you have to remember that in the West, they lost the ability around the 5th or 6th century. They lost the ability to read Homer in Greek. And so Western medieval interpretations of Homer continued to depend on the sort of slant that was cast by the Aeneid, which is very pro-Roman and therefore pro-Trojan, and then also depended on a bunch of other romances that were written about Troy, things like Troilus and Cressida, where and so on, all the way up to Dante's Divine Comedy, in which Odysseus is one of the counselors of fraud. He's in hell for this stuff. By the way, the most important thing Odysseus did in conquering Troy was not the device of the Trojan horse. That was just one of his many deceptions. The most important of which was the theft of the cultic statue of Athena, which is like this meteorite that had fallen from heaven. It was at the center of the Temple of Athena. This is the Pallium. Without it, as long as that's in the city, there's a prophecy that it's the shield of the city. So as long as that statue of the goddess is in the city cannot fall. And Odysseus is the one who comes up with a ruse to sneak into the city, steal the statue, which makes it then possible for the city to be conquered. So it's not just the Trojan horse. He did a
Yeah.
lot of sneaky stuff uh, over the course of things. And we'll come back to the Athena stuff in a moment because this is one of the most important things I think needs to be talked about. Okay, but I think that your basically right about this. I don't know whether Nolan intended it or not, but certainly, um, uh, Cersei only, if he was trying to make Cersei come across as a sympathetic feminist character, he did not do a good job.
Yeah.
Um, and the point that's trying to be made, these men are all pigs, they're all Brutus beasts, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's there in the Odyssey anyway.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there definitely is this kind of, in one of the Christian allegorical readings of the Odyssey in the Christian East, would be that between Odysseus and his men, there's the sort of Odysseus who is, who's the intellect,
Yeah.
right? He's the mind. And one of the things he's able to do is to rule over the lower passions. But then you constantly have his men, who are the lower passions, kind of running away with things and doing things. And eventually it's their inability to fast, right, that ultimately dooms the expedition. So I'm fine with that. I'm fine with all of that, actually. I did think that the the way that she sort of was manipulating their bodies to turn them
Yeah.
into, first of all, that was horrific.
It was really horrific. It's
I
like,
loved it.
yeah.
But it was really horrific. But I do think there is probably also kind of an interesting symbolic layer to that it's sort of like she's not just like giving, in the Odyssey, it's sort of like, here's some magical herbs and you eat the herbs and then you transform. And here she's, getting in there with her hands, let's just say.
Yeah.
Um, so I think overall, I think you're probably right. Like I said, I don't know if I would say Nolan intended it or not. That's impossible to answer without getting him on this podcast.
I know.
But but
The
I
thing
do think,
I want to remind
yeah.
people again is like I've had now several people make videos to kind of on my take. With that guy Metatron did like a whole review of my take. And people keep saying that there's no way that Nolan intended this, but you always have to remember that this is a movie about the Odyssey. And so if it was any other movie, I think that you'd have a better argument. But because the entire movie is about Odysseus and trickery and the Trojan horse, and in the movie, the trope of the Trojan horse is so important as a like this layered trick that he plays on the Trojans, plays on Sinon, and these lies upon lies. I'm like, I don't know, folks, anyways.
Let me unhelpfully suggest a deeper layer of that,
Yeah.
which is that something more like it's actually the story tricking Nolan.
Yeah, maybe. That is
Yeah.
definitely possible because
I
he has
I
to tell he has to tell the Odyssey. And so he kind of has to engage in certain things that he can't control.
One of the things that is in favor of this to me is the fact that nobody has ever done, uh, I'm not talking about film here, I'm talking about like in the Middle Ages. Nobody ever did a straight adaptation of the Odyssey. Like nobody could ever totally understand the character of Odysseus. And so when the story is retold, it's retold with a sort of like a sympathetic Trojan eye, basically sympathetic towards the Trojans, which is basically what Nolan is working with here. Um, it's sometimes also one of the interesting themes that comes out of it, and ultimately goes back to Dante, I think, is this idea that Odysseus is possessed with this sort of wanderlust, that he
Yeah.
just wants to sail forever, far out past the Pillars of Hercules, the way it's depicted in the Inferno. And this is not at all Odysseus of the poem. Odysseus just wants to get home.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe in a reasonable time frame, like if we spent 2 or 3 years picking up a little plunder on the way, that's okay. I almost said picking up a little booty along the way because that's a nice pun. But anyway,
But then
I'm
you
really
said it.
sorry.
So
I'm
I
really sorry.
almost said it, but then you
I
said it.
almost said it. But that's how Odysseus would have made that pun, though. He would have said, "Well, I didn't say
Yeah,
blah
exactly.
blah blah." But um, but certainly, like the 10-year home thing wasn't what he had in mind. It wasn't what he expected. So Odysseus just wants to get home, and this brings me to what I would say is my biggest critique of the film, and this is where we move into part three, which I will give Nolan like 2.5 stars. And part three has to do with how do you adapt the underlying values or symbolism of the original poem. And I think that this film, I don't have an issue with how much the gods are portrayed. Like, if you wanted to see Poseidon flying through the sky and noticing, oh, Odysseus is down in the ocean, let me smite him while he's on his way home from Ethiopia. Like, just imagine how bad the CGI would have been. We lucked out. It was better what Nolan did, guys. Like, stop pretending you wanted that. However,
Well,
throughout the film,
people are posting videos from the '97 version,
yeah,
and there's this crazy scene where Odysseus is climbing up a cliff, and Hermes is there and is like this like floating, slightly feminized, feminine
yeah,
guy that's like floating next to him in the air, and it just looks like, I mean, it's horrible.
yeah. I think you could sort of make a critique and say that the gods are somewhat psychologized,
Yeah,
and those exchanges between Odysseus and Zendaya Athena, um, uh, which in which she's like, "Oh, well, who doesn't understand violence? Who doesn't
yeah,
understand pain? All these different things." In general, that is an over psychologized view of ancient gods, which I don't like because I believe they're actual spiritual,
yeah.
people. But I do think what we got was probably the best thing we could have gotten in a film adaptation, and definitely, if I were to be doing it, I would have wanted to do something that was a little more on the subtle side. So I'm mostly okay with that, but I think that there's a profound misunderstanding. So throughout the film is a constant reference to Zeus's law, right? Over and over again. I mean, almost every other
Yeah,
line.
yeah.
And I would complain about that, except it's the same in the Odyssey. So can't complain about it too much. So there are these constant references to Zeus's law throughout the film. And what's actually being referred to is the idea of Xenia. So this is something you and I have talked about before, but I think it would be really important to understand the larger picture here because I think the picture that we get in Nolan is very one dimensional. So let me just try to lay it out very quickly. The first thing is the idea of Themis. In the play Antigone, she calls this the unwritten laws. These are also sometimes called the children of Themis or kind of justice or righteousness. And the first one of these is Xenia. Now, when people are talking about Zeus's law, they're almost always in the film, they're almost always talking about Xenia. So this is, however, a reciprocal obligation between guest and host. So right at the beginning of the film, they're where they are explaining to you through a little bit of dialogue exposition. They are explaining what Zeus's law is, and I think it's Penelope who says, "Oh, it's do unto others what you would have them do unto you," which is hilarious to me because that is a Christian value. It's only a Christian value. Nobody else has ever had that value, at least not in the ancient Near East. So this do unto others what you have them do unto you, aka the golden rule. This is not quite Zeus's law. Zeus's law, a better example of it is the example that was just given beforehand, which is also a Christian value, which is if a stranger comes to your door, you must entertain them because they might be a god in disguise. That is a better understanding of it. And by the way, still a Christian understanding. St. Paul says, take care to entertain strangers because in so doing, many have entertained angels unawares. So that's the same kind of an idea. But the thing to keep in mind is that Xenia is a reciprocal obligation between guest and host. And the reciprocity of it is something that seems to be totally lost in this film. I don't know if you want to say anything about that before we go
Yeah,
further.
I don't think that it's lost. I actually think that my sense is that he actually emphasizes that the first thing that you get, and this is what the more political aspect is, that people think that what Nolan is doing is basically saying, be nice to strangers, and it feels political. It feels like, just about how we need to host people from the outside constantly.
Yeah.
But there is also a clear demonstration of the abuses of that. And maybe it's like you said, maybe it's the story tricking him, which is the for example, like the suitors are clearly shown as abusing this relationship. They're abusing it, but Penelope can't do anything about it because she doesn't have any power. She can't. She even Telemachus is like, "Well, take care of the suitors or whatever." But he's like, like there's no, we don't, you can't do it. You don't have the strength to do it. But there is. I agree that there is a little bit of a problem, which is that the fact that when Odysseus comes back and he basically cleans up, he
Yeah.
seems to intimate that because of that he can't be king because
It's
he's
not it's not
betraying.
it's not just an intimation because what he says is, So in the poem, for people who haven't read it, in the poem, Odysseus and Telemachus together kill the suitors. And this is shown simultaneously. One of the things the Odyssey is a coming of age story for Telemachus. And so first under Mentor, and then sometimes Athena disguised as Mentor, which they did a bad job of kind of portraying that idea by just anyway, never mind. Dialogue issues again. But um, first under Mentor, and then under, meeting these other people who had known his father, and then slowly kind of growing into that stature, and ultimately standing alongside his father as Athena clothes them in the Aristei, the battle glory, right? And they are able to clean house, and the only reason they're able to do this is because Athena's on their side. And so it's this glorious moment in which then Telemachus participates in the setting aright of his father's house, which will one day be his house. What they do in the film is to completely deprive Telemachus of the end of his arc, his coming of age arc, by not allowing him. He sort of like fights that guy in the upper chamber, but they don't allow him to actually participate in the battle. And basically Odysseus says, it's because I'm going to go violate Zeus's law by killing these bad guests, and I'm getting revenge. And this is the defy the gods,
Yeah.
that they were talking about in the trailer, and everything was like, when is the defying the gods going to happen? Well, this is when. And it's basically saying, no, there's a human value, which is protecting my home, which is actually defying the gods. And so I'm going to do this, but then I'm going to, as the scapegoat, take upon myself the exile, which will have to come. So I think that Nolan is obsessed with Gerard. I don't know if he knows he is.
Yeah, for sure. No, for
But it's
sure.
obvious in the Batman films and everything else. Like, he's got this idea of, the scapegoat. And so for him, Odysseus has to become the scapegoat. And this is because he has I would say, a modern liberal Christian view of Xenia, in which the obligation is always on the side of the host and never on the side of the guest. But the actual guest-host relationship, you can't violate it either way.
Yeah.
So as a host, you have to show hospitality, but then as a guest, you have to be a good guest. And if you do something like overstepping your bounds, overstaying your welcome, taking more than your host has offered. So Paris violates Menelaus's Xenia when he abducts Helen, right? The whole Odyssey is actually structured, not just the end, but the whole of the Odyssey is actually structured by around the question, who honors Xenia and who does not.
Yeah.
And of course, these rules are for humans, so they don't quite apply to people like Calypso and Circe.
There is a place where I think, again, that the story overwhelms. I do agree with you, and I hate to do it, but I do agree with you that this is a tendency in the film, and this is because of the way that he ends it. I was happy to see, in some ways, the notion of Odysseus kind of giving his place to Telemachus. I thought that was good in terms of our moment and everything. But I agree that is definitely a problem where he presents it almost like the Unforgiven
Yeah.
movie, where he's like, I'm going to do these bad things, and I think they're bad, but I'm doing them because someone has to do it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there is an image of abuse of the guest hospitality, which is on the island of of Apollo with the heifers. There's definitely this idea that now you're a guest here, but the one thing you can't do is eat these cows, and they do it. There's also, yeah, I think that in the scene of the Cyclops, I think it suggested also that that his soldiers broke hospitality. I mean, I take it from the Goldilocks story, which is the idea that you should wait for someone in their house is, to me, is insane. Like, you don't go into someone's house and then wait for them to come back in their house, right? You wait to be invited. Obviously, you wait outside and then they
Yeah.
invite you in. So to me,
Yeah.
there's a sense that they also broke hospitality there. But it might in some ways also be, like you said earlier, that the story kind of overwhelming what Nolan's basic intent was.
So the story also merges and then also ignores, to me, some of the other children of Themis. So you have Hicessia, which is the right of the suppliant, which is not the same thing as the guest host.
Yeah.
The suppliant is somebody who comes begging for protection. Right. And this is different from somebody who just needs a meal, or you invite somebody. Usually Xenia is more like, I invite you to come and stay at my house. And
Yeah.
there has to be, you're right, there has to be an invitation. But with Hikesia, it's more about no, I'd like let me grab you. The image is always grabbing somebody by their knees. So you run up to somebody, you throw your arms around their knees, and you say, I have nobody else to turn to, and even if you're enemy, I'm asking you for protection. And then you have Kados and Philia. These are the bonds of kinship, marriage alliance, natural affection. Kados governs formal obligations of family relations, who gets married to whom, who owes what to which relative. And then Philia is the deeper current of loyalty and love that should bind a parent to a child, a brother to a brother, a husband to a wife. So these are also really important things in the
Mhm.
Odyssey. And I think that Nolan was so sort of fixated on his version of Xenia that he sometimes doesn't. I mean, I don't know what I want. Like, it's a 2-3 hour movie. You can only fit so much. Um, but the other two to talk about, I mean, there's a lot of these. Eusebia, which is proper reverence towards the gods, and then Ozian, which is the proper moral conduct beneath the gods. And Ozian mainly governs things like the treatment of the dead and the keeping of oaths. So the treatment of the dead is something I thought the film did relatively well. It is a huge problem throughout the Odyssey that Odysseus constantly doesn't bury his men, and they almost exaggerated it a little in the film, but it certainly comes up at the moment of when he goes to the underworld, which is my favorite scene in the whole movie. By the way, thought it was great. Um, and uh, so what this means basically is you have to give proper burial rites, proper funerary rites, and this is why every epic has a funeral in it. Usually, it's because there was somebody you were supposed to give funerary rites to, as in the Odyssey and the Aeneid, and then you weren't able to for whatever reason, and now their soul is just sort of wandering this sort of the hinterland of the underworld, but they're not able to rest until you give them a proper funeral. And the proper funeral means burning their bodies, but it also means you have a feast, you have games. The Olympic Games have their origin as funerary games and
Mhm.
so on. Um,
So what do you think of the way that Nolan used the tradition about Odysseus? I mean, from Dante, basically
yeah.
Odysseus, after he comes back home, leaving again, basically going to America. It was what almost you feel like he's doing in
Yeah.
the movie, but that he portrays it as the way that he's going to go and honor his dead men. I was like, I never heard that before.
This is in the Odyssey. So
Oh, it is. Oh.
his instruction that he's given by Tyreus is in order to atone for these guys that he hasn't buried. After he gets home and settles things, he's to take a ship and he's to sail somewhere and then basically walk so far inland carrying an oar that he meets somebody who says, "What is that?" In other words, you're so far from the coast, nobody's ever seen an oar.
Mhm.
And at that place, he's supposed to offer sacrifice on behalf of his men. So that's in the tradition. But it's never the idea that like in the Odyssey, the idea is not there that then Odysseus is just compelled by this wanderlust to keep on going. When actually, what the film seems to imply, Jonathan, is that he just keeps sailing. He gets to America,
Yeah.
and he becomes the first Mormon. That seems to be
I didn't expect that. Well, for sure, there is a sense. I mean, I kept trying to wrap my head around why he has Odysseus going to America, and because that's what he seems to be implying for sure. And I was thinking, is he trying to imply in some ways that the manner in which exploration and new civilization is born out of the kind of the guilt and the desire to remediate your guilt of the things, like to in some ways start anew by basically saying, okay, we
yeah,
I can't live in this old world anymore, right?
that's right.
I've done too many things. This old world is ruined. I have to kind of give it to someone else, and now I need to move to the new place and start again. Because in terms of the structure of the movie, that's clearly what it is. It's like, you it's about the end of a world and the beginning of a new world, or the
Yeah,
burgeoning of a new world. And so that's the sense that I kind of had of what he was trying to do there.
yeah. So I think that Nolan's main thesis with the movie seems to me to be that the violation of Xenia brings about the end of the old world, brings about the sort of the
Yeah.
end of our age of bronze, one might say, and and that um, and I basically agree with that.
Yeah.
But I just think that the laws, there's more dimension to them than Nolan was able to portray. I think he's kind of myopic in his depiction of Xenia, and then he doesn't know about or is less interested in
Yeah.
the other laws. And but basically the if you look at the way that all of the stuff is received in the Greek tragedy tradition, right? You very much see this idea that the systematic violations, actually beginning in Thebes and then moving on to the story of the Trojan War. And we're going to talk about all of this, by the way, in the symbolic in the Universal History Masterclass that we're doing. But the violation of Themis, the violation of the children of Themis, Xenia, Hecatsia, Katos and Philia, and Eusebia, which is piety, proper reverence towards the gods, and Ozian and Time, which is honor, the recognition owed to those who merit it, um, which is owed to four kinds of beings, which is the gods, the dead, the aged, and the guest. Right? Those are the four kinds of people you have to honor. Um, and then eidos, which is this idea of healthy shame I mentioned earlier: shame, reverence, moral restraint. What Hesiod says is that at the end of an age, eidos, healthy shame, and nemesis. So these are basically, you could say, like reverence and righteous indignation will wrap themselves in white robes and depart from the earth for Olympus and will abandon mortals entirely. And that when this happens, there is no defense against evil. And that's when everything kind of collapses.
Mm.
But because Nolan is working in, again, this sort of modern liberal Christian or post-Christian framework, all that he can see is it was a violation of Xenia, and he seems a little blinded to he's not blinded to it. He sees that there's a violation of Xenia going on and what the suitors are doing, but he sort of denies the justice of setting things right, or at least moves it from the level of divine justice to just the level of human justice.
Uh-huh.
And sort of saying, all right, I'll be the one that will violate the unwritten laws of the god to set my house in order. But actually, Odysseus is not violating the law of the gods. He is keeping Xenia by doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
Because the suitors have violated, now he's setting things back in order, and that's why Athena intervenes. That's why Odysseus alone, except for Menelaus, of all the people who come home from Troy, well, Diomedes, okay, 3 guys, um, has a happy ending. You know, as happy as you could have in the context of the Bronze Age, because he comes home, he has to kill all the suitors, but then what immediately happens is all the suitors' families find out what's going on, they gear up and they show up, and there's gonna be another big fight,
Yeah.
and then Athena shows up and says, "No, what has happened here is just knock it off." So this is the last thing that I wanna maybe mention is something I thought I was very happy with in the film. The figure of Athena in the whole epic cycle, she's easily the most important deity. She is the one who basically tricks Hector so that he'll turn and fight Achilles and be killed. She's the one who, so she does all these things, and she's always on the side of the Greeks, which is weird because the greatest temple to Athena and the greatest devotion to Athena was actually within Troy.
Uh-huh.
And so this is one of the trickier things, one of the twists and turns in the epic cycle. And in Troy, they have a great temple to Athena. They have they have this statue of her that sort of fell from the sky, which is their main cultic artifact. Odysseus has to steal that. Um, Eventually, the whole epic cycle. One of the things that dooms the homegoings of many of the Achaeans is the way in which the temples, and I think in particular the temple of Athena, are violated during the sack of Troy.
Uh-huh. Well, they show
So
that in the movie for sure.
yeah, and so this is something they show well in the film. I thought the sort of like, you understand the reason this is what Athena looks like is because there was like a young priestess of Athena, and she's beheaded at the same time as the statue. Um, I I don't know, I actually kinda liked that,
Yeah.
and I think that this is so basically, I my headcanon about this is that the character that's played by Zendaya is Cassandra. So
Mhm.
for people who don't know, Cassandra is this she's a prophetess, and but she's doomed that nobody will ever listen to any of her prophecies, right? And so she predicts everything the Achaeans are going to do. She warns them against the Trojan horse, all these different things. The Trojans call her name and hurl insults at her, and actually attempting to prove herself right, Cassandra actually takes an axe and a burning torch and runs towards the Trojan horse. She's going to set it on fire to prove what's going on, and then the Trojans stop her. Um, and then during the sack of the city, she seeks shelter in the temple of Athena, and she wraps her arms around the statue of Athena in supplication for her protection. So she's going to the goddess asking for protection, and then Ajax the Lesser basically rapes her on the altar. And this was sacrilege, and this is one of the things that causes a lot of the problems of people as they're going home. So it's not just a violation. That one of the weirder things to me about the film, like, I understand from a modern perspective that the horse thing was supposed to be a violation of Zeus's law, but there's really no sense of that in the ancient world. Like, Athena likes this kind of thing.
Mhm.
So this is the so the it's a sneaky thing to do, obviously, but it's in no way would have been seen as a violation of Xenia. Actually, it's a way of getting around Xenia, because you're able to avoid the see, if they invite me in, then I have to behave,
Mhm.
right? But if I can sneak in, then kind of like all bets are off. So
Yeah.
anyway, I mostly liked that stuff. I just wish that um I just wish that the Odysseus's guilt about sacking Troy is the most modern part of
For
the film,
sure.
and I don't hate it because, again, it's kind of necessary. People who are complaining about it don't necessarily understand that Western depictions of the Trojan War have been vastly pro-Troy
Yeah. For
for
2,000
millennia.
years.
Yeah. So, there's really no way to make us like Odysseus unless he at least feels a little bad about what he does. So anyway, those are some thoughts about the movie. I don't actually you'll notice that we haven't talked about the sort of like the woke casting and things like this at all. I guess maybe one thing to bring up would be um the casting of the oh
I've seen on.
yeah. So the only place where I actually thought your argument sort of fell flat is that character was sort of praised at the end of the film as
Right.
like
The
a
bravest
truly
young
brave
man.
man, bravest young man, but
But he does it to like shame the
yeah.
suitor. And that's what
Well,
I
and
think.
that's the thing, it's like there's nothing about the film that actually does anything to sort of make that character sympathetic to me other than, the moment where I guess he takes the other guy's tally. But I did sort of, uh, Odysseus basically just, like, sacrificing that guy is the coldest thing Odysseus does in the film.
That's
It's
right.
definitely the
For
most
sure.
Bronze Age thing he does in the film. So, anyway, I did feel like the sort of "He's the bravest young man I've ever known." I did feel like that was probably trying to push something a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
My
know.
sense is that he was doing it to shame the suitor,
Well,
especially.
that's within the context of, like, within the narrative of the film, that's what it's
Yeah,
doing.
but you think like in terms of meta
Yeah.
thing that Nolan was trying to kind of get a message across, which is possible.
Yeah.
Which is definitely possible. But one of the things I wanted to say, which is interesting to me, is people know that we're working on something we're calling the Age of Heroes, which is going to be a retelling of the epic cycle from Jason all the way to King Arthur. And we met like months ago to try to plan out these stories. And because Xenia, there's an aspect of Xenia in scripture, which is the difference between Abraham meeting the angels and then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that there's a parallel between this idea of the guest host relationship. We also kind of decided that we were going to make Xenia an easy, like not an easy, but a thread that we could put all through the
Yeah.
stories to kind of help people understand basically Zeus's law in a way that was understandable for modern people. Obviously, thinking of the both sides of the guest and the
Yeah.
host relationship. So I just thought it was interesting that Nolan also, although like you said, there is trickiness, there is a little bit of slippery aspect to
Yeah.
how he understands Xenia. But I just thought it was interesting that he also came to that conclusion, which is if I make it about this, then I can hold it together. I can kind of bring the things together.
Yeah, I think that that is the way to go. What we're going to try to do is to show not just Xenia, but Xenia also in relationship to the other unwritten laws.
Yeah.
And I think that is to me where Nolan is the weakest in all of this, is that he's basically only got Xenia, he's only got sort of one side of it. And that to really kind of give obviously the idea that these are the laws by which society coheres, and there are Christian versions of all of these, but basically they're immutable laws of the cosmos. These are the laws by which society coheres, and if you violate them, eventually your civilization will fall apart. And you could just look around at our civilization right now and ask the question: to what extent are the unwritten laws being kept or violated? It's an interesting question, but I basically felt like his perspective on them was just very one dimensional, and it needn't have been.
Okay, so
Um,
wait, there is an example, a clear example of guest abuse relationship. And what in some ways what Nolan is doing in the movie is that he's bringing you to finally understand that the abusers of the host of the guest relationship is Odysseus's men. That scene with the Greek, I think that Nolan was really doing something there because people complain about how there are no Greeks in the movie. There's one Greek in the movie. And the Greek man is on his knees and he's speaking Greek. They have to translate it, with in English. And he asks Odysseus' men as his village is burning, he says, "Are you the people of the sea?" And the Patel character answers in English, "No, we are Greeks from Ithaca." And so I think that he was trying to kind of show, he was tricking us. At first, you don't know what's going on. You'll finally find out that through the pillaging of the villages along the way, that this is an abuse in his, at least in Nolan's understanding, this is an abuse of also the guest in terms of the host. Which maybe in the poem that's not seen. Like if you could pillage a city, I'm sure in the poem it's not as
it's tricky because if you're pillaging kinsmen, then it's not a violation of Xenia. It's a violation of philia
yeah,
or kiros, right? It's sort of like if you're my people, right?
yeah.
Anyway, so it's a little tricky. Again, it might seem to some people like I'm splitting hairs. I do think that obviously all these laws are interrelated. It's important to have them for the whole world to cohere, though.
Yeah.
And so when you sort of pick just one of them and you make it kind of one dimensional, then basically Nolan seems to be at odds between the let's say the Bronze Age aspects of things and then the sort of the modern post-Christian liberal aspects of things. And he's always, and I think he does a ultimately as good a job as anybody could do in kind of trying to work with those things. But another way you could go would be to actually really understand the whole structure of the unwritten laws, which is carried through into Christianity. It's just, you know, it's just taken up a notch, basically. And same way, the unwritten laws. This is the Torah for the Greeks, right? And so, the same way that the Torah is sort of taken up a notch in Christianity, you can't commit adultery, but now in Christianity, you can't even look at a woman to lust after her. Or in the same way, the unwritten laws of the Greeks are just taken up a notch in Christianity, right? And so. But still, the fact that these things are sacred and very often only enforced by the gods, right? And the way that the gods enforce them is that if you violate them, your civilization collapses, your family comes apart, your city falls. Um, that is to me the most interesting thing about the epic cycle. And
And this is it. This is it, Deacon
yeah,
Seraphim. This is the thing, is that unlike a lot of the people that are either throwing dirt or throwing praise at this movie, we are going to actually do it.
yeah,
And so now we have to put up, which is, are we going to be able to tell a version of the epic cycle that is better than Christopher Nolan. That's
So
our challenge.
I did come home. You're gonna be this is the first time that I've told you this, and you're gonna be a little dismayed. But I came home and I scrapped
Oh
my
no!
half-finished draft of Jason the Argonauts and started over again.
Oh no!
So that was yeah, I know. But it's probably, but it just realized I was like, okay, there are certain things. I mean, the film was helpful to me in the
Mm,
sense that it sort of gave me some ideas of how can we portray these things? How much can we get away with depicting, like just playing it straight, et cetera. So,
yeah, and
so
also
it was,
contracting, like because we
yeah.
also do have to contract. We're not going to do these epic poems. We're
Guys,
going to
Jonathan
contract
keeps
them.
telling me I have to make things shorter.
And so but it made me excited about what we're doing because I
Yeah,
felt like, this is really we're right in the zeitgeist. Everybody all of a sudden now is curious about these stories. And we're in the process of putting together, something that no one's ever done, which is basically tell the story of these unwritten laws in heroism from the beginning of the epic cycle all the way to when it becomes the Christian knight, right? All the way to the
yeah,
story of King Arthur.
yeah. Yeah, and that through line is so interesting to me because what the amazing thing is that if you look at the laws of chivalry, for instance, as they are explained to young Percival as he's being educated, they are the same unwritten laws.
Yeah.
But now there's a Christian dimension to them, right?
Mm.
So anyway, very excited about all of this. In general, I did like the movie. My wife enjoyed it, and I've definitely enjoyed the Odyssey discourse. It's been very fun for me. What's really interesting is how few people seem to have actually read the poem, and but it's led to some great conversations. Obviously, if you're the classicist in people's life, I'm getting a lot of texts right now. Hey, what translation of the Odyssey should I read? So all those things are good. And, like I said, it did make me rethink some things about how I was approaching retelling this story. So I'm excited to see where that goes. So,
Right.
and if you want to learn more about the unwritten laws and how all this stuff coheres, there are two wrong approaches that you should not take to reading the epic cycle. One is to just say these are a bunch of demon worshiping pagans and they only do bad things, and just to judge everything they're doing purely by the standards of Christian morality. And the other would be to basically, basically be to misunderstand everything they do. Again, by in terms of like kind of a modern liberal Christian morality, right? Which again, this is my biggest criticism of the film is that Nolan seems to do this with Xenia to me.
Mhm.
Um, but there's another way. There's another way. And so if you come and take our Universal History Masterclass, we're going to spend a couple of weeks on this, just building out a framework for reading and understanding the epic cycle, and then actually looking at the ways that Christians, not just in the West, but a lot of people will not be aware that actually there's a long tradition of reading the Odyssey and the Iliad in the East, where we never stop being able to read things in Greek. And there's a really long tradition of reading the epic cycle in a way that influences storytelling in a way that even influences the poetry of Holy Week. So, if you're interested in that sort of thing and you want to see this framework of the unwritten laws and how Christ keeps and fulfills it, then you'll want to tune in for that. So, hopefully, some of you folks will join us for the masterclass.
Yes, it is. It's coming very soon. In a few weeks, we're going to start it. And it's such a weird time. It's so weird that we've been doing this forever and we've been planning this Universal History Masterclass. And it just comes right at the time when everybody's asking the questions about what is this?
Yeah.
What is this Xenia? What is this? All of this, these questions.
Listen, Jonathan, when they make the Kepler and Agast movie in a few years, like then I'll know we're really like locked into the cultural moment.
And they have to make sure the casting is diverse, though. So it might not happen.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
No, man. Yeah.
Oh
All
my
right.
goodness.
All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. We kind of said it was going to be a debate. I'm not a debater, so I just basically nodded along and pushed back a little bit. But I hope you enjoyed Deacon Seraphim's take as usual. He has he knows the things, which is helpful for us, all of us. So thanks, Deacon Seraphim.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.